Imagine, just for a second, a world where all these tiny, incredibly sophisticated machines are silently orbiting above us, constantly reshaping how we live, how we communicate, even, how we farm.
Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it?
It really does. But it's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just some far-off vision. It's a rapidly expanding industry. It connects technology, business, global impact. It's all intertwined in ways we're really only just starting to grasp.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into that exact world, the booming realm of small satellites. And we're looking at a company right at the forefront, Leothayre.
Right.
We've pulled together a fascinating stack of sources for this one. We've got a profile of Leothayre, their financials, news stories about the wider space industry. Quite a mix.
And our mission today really is to cut through all that information. We want to pull out the key insights, maybe uncover some surprising facts, and give you, the listener, a really clear picture of this field. It's evolving so fast.
It really is. It's one of those topics where the innovation just keeps coming. I'm ready to jump in.
Good. Because what makes this sector so compelling is that dynamism and how, the tech advancements are so closely linked to the economics and even some pretty significant environmental questions, too.
Okay, let's start with the basics then, the sort of celestial landscape itself. We all know satellites were up there circling Earth. But the sheer numbers now.
Yeah.
That's the real story, isn't it?
It is. Around 10,000 active satellites currently.
Yeah.
And that number, it's expected to just explode in the next few years.
Wow.
But what's really changed the game is the difference between the, let's say, traditional large satellites and these newer, smaller ones that are driving all this growth.
Right.
Historically, satellites were huge. Up to 6 tons. And they were placed way out in geosynchronous Earth orbit, GEO.
GEO. Okay, so those are the giants. They look like they're staying put in the sky because their orbit matches Earth's rotation perfectly.
Exactly. Always over the same spot. Great for continuous coverage of one area.
And being so far out means basically no atmospheric drag, right? So they last a really long time.
Precisely. Very stable, very long-lived. But interestingly, they only make up about maybe 12% of active satellites today.
Only 12%, so what's the rest?
The vast majority, we're talking 85%, are in low Earth orbit, LEO, and another 3% or so in medium Earth orbit, MEO. These are non-geosynchronous.
Meaning they're constantly moving across the sky relative to us down here, circling the Earth multiple times a day.
That's it. And crucially, they're much lower down, right at the edge of the atmosphere, really.
Okay, so that means they do face atmospheric resistance, drag.
They do, and that gradually slows them down. Gravity pulls them lower, friction heats them up.
And eventually they just burn up on re-entry. So they have a kind of built-in expiration date, orbitally speaking.
That's a good way to think about it. And this leads us right into why the small satellite market has just taken off.
Okay, why are they so dominant now?
Simple answer. They're way cheaper to build and launch. Much cheaper. And being in those lower orbits actually makes communication easier in many ways. Less power needed, lower latency.
And when we say small, we really mean small, but still incredibly capable, right? The big growth seems to be in what they call nanosatellites.
Yeah.
Like 1 to 10 kilograms.
Yeah, nanos and micros, which are maybe 10 to 100 kilograms. It's genuine miniaturization of space tech. Think Moore's Law, but for space hardware.
So how did they manage to scale up production like this?
Standardization. That was the key. Take CubeSats. You've probably heard them.
Vaguely, yeah. Little boxes.
Exactly. Standardized cubes. The basic unit, 1U, is 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. But they come in multiples, 1.5U, 2U, 3U, 6U, even 12U. Most common are the 3, 6, and 12U sizes.
And that standardization, I guess it makes everything easier for the rockets, like designing the dispenser that pushes them out.
Precisely. It radically simplifies adapting launch vehicles and deployment mechanisms. Costs just plummet when you can standardize like that. It's like modular building blocks, but for space. And then you have things like pocket cubes, even smaller, 5 by 5 centimeters, less than a quarter of a kilogram.
Wow.
You can fit 8 of those into the space of one standard CubeSat. It makes building and launching a satellite accessible even for, say, university students or even hobbyists. It's really opened things up.
But these aren't just toys, right? Even these tiny ones.
Yeah.
There must still be huge engineering challenges.
Oh, absolutely. Huge. You've got power management batteries, tiny solar panels, then heat dissipation, electronics generate heat, and in a vacuum, getting rid of it is tough.
Right. No air to carry it away.
And just ensuring every single component can survive the launch, the vibration, the G-forces, and then function in the harsh environment of space. Vacuum, extreme temperature swings, radiation.
Yeah, it's not trivial.
No, the design ingenuity is pretty remarkable. But they've solved a lot of these problems, which lets these small satellites do an amazing variety of jobs.
Okay, let's talk about those jobs, the missions. What are these little workhorses actually doing up there? Communications, I guess that's a big one.
Huge. Satellites are perfect for overcoming line-of-sight issues. Mountains, the curvature of the Earth, they block signals. Satellites let you beam internet, phone calls, TV signals globally.
And this is where constellations come in, right?
Yeah.
Lots of satellites working together.
Exactly. You launch dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands of these small satellites. They talk to each other, relaying signals. This creates a continuous global network, so you can communicate from one side of the Earth to the other seamlessly.
Okay, comms. What else? Navigation, GPS.
Yep. Navigation satellites, typically those bigger ones in GEO, triangulate distances to your device, your phone, your car's sat-nav, gives you that precise location, often down to a few feet. Critical for planes, ships, cars, everything that moves, really.
Even just walking around town.
Right. But maybe the most dynamic area, especially for these LEO small sats, is Earth observation.
Oh, okay. Looking down at us.
Looking down and sensing specific things, they have sophisticated sensors on board.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Like I saw in one of our sources, the Wexland Daily, that big farming companies pay for satellite data to check crop health.
Yeah.
Scanning light frequencies over massive fields.
That's a classic example. Or think about localized weather forecasting. That same Wexland Daily story mentioned it. Standard forecasts just aren't good enough for, say, a farmer needing to know about rain in the next hour or two before harvest.
Or builders pouring concrete, or oil companies moving rigs. They need hyperlocal, short-term predictions.
Exactly. And LEO satellites can provide that data. They can also spot forest fires, track volcanic ash plumes, measure air pollution, monitor deforestation or urban sprawl. The list is endless. Anything happening on the Earth's surface or in the atmosphere.
So observing Earth, what about looking outwards? Or doing things in space?
Also, key roles. Space telescopes on satellites, like Hubble or James Webb, get a clear view without Earth's atmosphere messing things up. You can test new kinds of propulsion systems up there.
Yeah.
And even manufacturing. Certain things, like specialized metal alloys or perfectly round ball bearings, are hard to make perfectly with gravity pulling everything down. In microgravity, much easier. So satellites can become tiny factories.
Okay, so you've got all these different missions. How do you decide where to put the satellite? Does the job dictate the orbit?
Absolutely, 100%. The mission dictates the orbit. Take those GEO satellites again. Constant view of one area. Perfect for TV broadcasting or weather monitoring over a specific region.
Whereas the LEO satellites, the non-geosynchronous ones, they cover more ground over time.
Right.
But you see a given spot only intermittently.
Correct. So if you need continuous coverage of a large area with LEO satellites, you need a constellation. Lots of them spaced out.
And then you have different types of orbits too, like polar orbits.
Right. Polar orbits pass over or near the North and South poles. As the Earth rotates underneath, the satellite eventually surveys the entire planet. Great for mapping or environmental monitoring. Equatorial orbits, conversely, circle above the equator, continuously passing over the same regions.
And there's something called inclination.
Yeah, that's just the angle of the orbit relative to the equator. 0 degrees is an equatorial orbit, 90 degrees is a perfect polar orbit. Most orbits are somewhere in between.
Okay, here's something that blew my mind a bit. The relationship between altitude and speed. You'd think higher up means slower, right? Less gravity.
You would think. But it's the opposite for orbits. To stay in a lower orbit, you need to travel much, much faster to counteract gravity's pull. A satellite at, say, 700 kilometers altitude is whipping around at maybe 28,000 kilometers per hour.
Wow.
Whereas a GEO satellite way out at 36,000 kilometers is cruising at a mere 11,000 kilometers per hour. It's all about balancing velocity and gravitational pull.
That is wild. Okay, so satellites are up there doing their jobs, but they need to talk to us, right? They're not totally autonomous.
Not usually, no. That link back to Earth is critical. Ground stations are essential for sending commands up and getting data down.
And these ground stations, they vary a lot too.
Massively. For big GEO satellites handling huge data volumes, you might need large arrays of big dishes. But for other missions, maybe a mobile unit, like a TV truck for a live broadcast link.
Or even tiny antenna,
Yeah.
like built into a handheld GPS receiver.
Exactly. Or like that example you mentioned earlier, a CubeSat providing temporary internet at a remote construction site.
Yeah.
That might use a relatively small portable ground antenna set up nearby.
Which brings us to, well, the challenge of actually getting them up there in the first place, the launch.
Ah, yes. The journey to space. That's a whole other level of complexity.
Rockets obviously come in different sizes. Some launch one huge satellite, others can carry dozens of small ones, right? Like a rideshare.
Correct. But the planning is meticulous. The rocket has to release each satellite at a very precise point in space with exactly the right velocity and orientation. Get it wrong.
And it either falls back to Earth, or maybe it ends up in the wrong orbit. Useless.
Exactly. The calculations are incredibly complex. You have to account for Earth's gravity, the moon's gravity, atmospheric drag, even at high altitudes, Earth's rotation, its movement around the sun. It's serious orbital mechanics.
That where you launch from matters too, doesn't it? Something about the equator.
Yes, optimizing the launch site is key. If you launch towards the east, you get a speed boost from Earth's rotation. That boost is strongest at the equator.
Ah, because the Earth's surface is moving fastest there.
Precisely. So launching eastwards from near the equator saves fuel, which means you can carry a heavier payload or get to a higher orbit more easily. Launching westwards or into a polar orbit requires much more energy because you're fighting against or not benefiting from that rotational boost.
Makes sense. And the rockets themselves, they shed parts as they go up. I remember reading something about stages.
Yes, that was in the Happy Comic source, I think. Most rockets use staging, typically 2 stages. The first stage is the big, powerful one. It burns for maybe 2 minutes, does the heavy lifting through the thick lower atmosphere.
Then it just falls off.
It separates and falls back to Earth, usually into the ocean or a designated remote area. Then the second stage, which is smaller and lighter, ignites. It has a more efficient engine optimized for the near vacuum of space, and it carries the payload, the satellite or satellites, the rest of the way into orbit.
A kind of orbital ballet.
It is. And these launch sites, the spaceports, they're not chosen randomly. Location is critical for safety.
Right. You don't want rocket stages landing on towns.
Definitely not. They're usually near coasts or large deserts, so debris falls harmlessly. They also need to be clear of busy air traffic routes. And weather is a big factor. You can't launch in high winds, or sometimes extreme temperatures affect fueling.
Plus just the logistics, I suppose.
Yeah.
Getting huge rocket parts, fuel, the satellites themselves to the launch site. You need good roads, ports.
Good transport links are essential. And importantly, the political stability of the host country matters too. It's a huge investment to build and operate a spaceport.
Okay, so we're launching more and more stuff. But there's a downside, isn't there? An unseen cost. Environment, debris.
Yes, that's becoming a major concern. The environmental impact of launches isn't insignificant. That Happy Comics source pointed out that burning all that fuel rapidly releases greenhouse gases and soot high up in the atmosphere, where they can linger and cause more warming effect than at ground level.
And toxic stuff, too, from fuel that doesn't burn completely.
Sometimes, yes. Jettison stages might contain unburned toxic propellants that can create vapor clouds. And then there's a big one. Space debris. Space junk.
This seems like a huge problem waiting to happen, or maybe already happening. Old satellites just stay up there for years.
They can, especially in higher orbits. Even in Leo, they can take years or decades to decay naturally. And everything up there is moving incredibly fast, tens of thousands of kilometers per
It's
hour.
even a tiny collision.
Can be catastrophic. A fleck of paint can hit with the energy of a bowling ball. And a big problem is old satellites exploding, maybe leftover fuel or batteries failing. That creates thousands of new pieces of debris from a single event.
The numbers I saw were kind of terrifying, like 35,000 objects bigger than 10 centimeters, nearly 1 million between 1 and 10 centimeters.
Those are the tracked objects, yes.
Yeah.
And we have around 10,000 operational satellites now, but projections suggest that could hit 70,000 in the next decade. The risk of collisions is growing exponentially.
Can they just design them to come down safely?
They can, but it adds complexity and cost. You need extra fuel, thrusters, control systems for deorbiting. That increases the satellite's mass, which increases launch costs. So there's an economic disincentive, unfortunately.
So what's being done? I read about Wexland signing a space junk charter.
Yes, that was in the Wexland Business News. It's a non-legally binding agreement, but it's important. It encourages countries and companies to adopt better practices. Things like designing final rocket stages so they don't break apart and deorbit quickly, and making sure satellites are passivated at the end of their life, venting leftover fuel, discharging batteries to minimize explosion risks.
So steps in the right direction, but maybe not legally enforceable yet.
Not globally, no. It's more about setting norms and encouraging responsibility.
Okay, let's pivot now and zoom in on one specific company navigating this whole complex landscape. Leothayre.
Right. Based in Wexland, which we know is a developed country, good stock exchange, follows international accounting standards. Founded 2004, went public in 2017.
And their niche is specifically small satellites, right? 1 kilogram up to 75 kilograms.
That's their focus. And what seems to really define them is this complete service model they offer.
What does that mean in practice?
It means they basically hold the client's hand through the whole process. Starts with consultation. Their engineers work with the client to figure out the mission, what sensors are needed, the best orbit, that kind of thing.
And then they actually build a satellite.
They do. Design and build in-house, which is crucial because building stuff for space is really hard. Every component has to be space rated.
Meaning it can survive launch, vacuum, temperature swings, radiation.
All of it. The testing is incredibly rigorous. Vibration tables, thermal vacuum chambers. You can't afford failures. I read that even the fasteners, the screws, have to be special space-rated ones so they don't, outgas in the vacuum and cause problems.
Wow. Okay, so they build it. Do they launch it too?
No, they don't operate their own rockets. They work with third-party launch providers, SpaceX, Rocket Lab, Arianespace, companies like that. Leothayre negotiates the launch slot for the client.
And after launch?
They also operate their own ground stations to communicate with the satellites they've built, manage them, and downlink the data for the client. They might use third-party stations too for specific needs, but they have that core capability, so it really is end-to-end support.
That sounds efficient. How fast can they turn these projects around?
Pretty fast, actually. The profile said a typical mission from first meeting to launch is maybe 12 to 18 months.
That's quick for space.
It is. And if it's a repeat build using a similar design, they can do it in as little as 4 to 6 months.
Is it that standardization again?
Partly. They've developed what they call the Leothayre standard. Basically, a pre-designed CubeSat bus or body in those common 3U, 6U, 12U sizes. They can then adapt that standard body quickly to integrate the specific sensors or payload the client needs. Speeds things up considerably.
Smart. And how are they doing? What's their track record like?
Seems very solid. The profile mentions 64 satellites designed, built, and successfully launched. And they apparently have a healthy order book, lots of projects lined up. They've built a good international reputation for hitting deadlines.
And their overall goal, their mission statement, to lead in the creation and operation of satellites that meet the needs of clients for space-based facilities, and a vision to enhance the quality of life on Earth through space tech. Seems quite aspirational.
It does. And their values, excellence, innovation, integrity, fairness, relationships, corporate stuff, but important signals.
Looking at their board of directors, it's quite a mix of skills, isn't it?
Very diverse. You've got electronic and mechanical engineers, aerospace experts, but also people from banking, sales, academia, even politics. That breadth seems really valuable in an industry that touches so many different areas.
Yeah, covering all the bases,
Yeah.
launch partnerships, HR, R&D, the actual satellite building, finance, sales, PR. And they have the usual board committees, audit, risk, remuneration, nomination. Seems like solid governance structure.
Which you'd expect for a quoted company, but of course being relatively young in such a fast-moving industry isn't without risks.
Like what? Forecasting must be tricky.
Very tricky, and the regulations are constantly shifting as governments try to catch up with the technology. Leothayre mentions they try to actively engage and shape those regulations, which makes sense.
What about the big one? What if a satellite just fails after it's launched? Who carries that risk?
That's a crucial point in their model. Leothayre does extensive testing, obviously, but the profile states that ownership, and therefore the risk, transfers to the customer at the moment of launch.
Oh, okay.
So if the satellite malfunctions in orbit, for some reason radiation hit, component failure, it's generally the customer's loss, unless they could prove Leothayre was negligent in how they built or tested it.
That's a pretty clear line.
Yeah.
What about other business risks? Relying on suppliers? Or maybe only having a few big customers?
They seem aware of those. They try to mitigate supplier dependency by doing a lot of fabrication in-house. And they manage customer concentration risk through close relationships and careful contract monitoring. Plus, things like currency fluctuations or political instability. They use financial hedging and make sure they get paid in stages by clients. Standard risk management, really.
Just to put them in context financially, we saw the numbers. They're doing well, revenue in the billions of Wexland dollars, profitable. But their competitor, Orbilink, is bigger,
Yes, Orblink has significantly higher revenue and profit based on the 2025 figures we saw. Leothaire's revenue was $1,782 million. Orblink's was $2,566 million. Profit was $175 million for Leothayre, $335 million for Orblink. So Leothayre is a major player, but Orblink is the larger entity in their specific market segment, it seems.
And Leothaire's beta was 1.15, meaning its stock price is a bit more volatile than the market average.
Correct. Pretty typical for a company in a high-growth, tech-focused, slightly risky industry.
Finally, let's not forget the people involved, the engineers. This isn't like building a car, is it?
Not at all. That Central City University MSc in space construction highlights it. The demands are extreme.
Right. Things have to survive the launch, work in zero gravity, cope with huge temperature shifts, resist radiation.
And as the Wexland Business News piece emphasized, a single failure can doom the entire mission. Every component, down to the last screw, has to be absolutely perfect and rated for space. There's just no room for error.
It really is incredible precision engineering, a testament to human skill.
It really is, ensuring every circuit, every joint can survive and function for years in that hostile vacuum.
So, wrapping up, we've journeyed through this whole universe of small satellites.
Yeah.
From just how many there are, what they do, the engineering, the business side.
Mm-hmm.
What really stands out to me is this kind of dual nature. On one hand, incredible promise for communication, navigation, understanding our planet better.
Right.
But balanced against these really significant hurdles, the environmental costs, the space debris problem, the sheer difficulty of operating reliably in space.
Absolutely. I think this deep dive gives you a unique window onto an industry that's maybe quietly but really profoundly changing things, from farming, like we said, to how we connect globally.
So it leaves you wondering, doesn't it, as we keep launching more and more stuff, thousands upon thousands of satellites,
Right.
What does responsible use of space look like in the future? How do we keep innovating, keep pushing boundaries, but also act as, good stewards of this orbital backyard we're filling up?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Balancing that ambition with long-term sustainability. It's something we'll all need to keep an eye on.